This is from the Gateless Gate, case 16, bell sound and priest's robe. The main case. Yunmen said, look, this world is vast and wide. Why do you put on your priest's robe at the sound of the bell? The commentary. In studying Zen and disciplining yourself, you must strictly avoid following sounds and clinging to forms. Even though you may be enlightened by hearing a sound or have your mind clarified by seeing a form, this is just a matter of course. It is nothing to talk about either. If a Zen student is able to master sounds and forms, they can clearly see the reality of everything, and they're wonderfully free in everything they do. Though it may be so, you tell me, does the sound come to your ear, or does your ear go to the sound? Even if you're able to transcend both sound and silence, how do you speak of that fact? If you listen with your ear, you cannot truly get it. When you hear with your eye, then you can really get it. The capping verse. If you understand it, all things are one. If you do not, they are different and separate. If you do not understand it, all things are one. If you do, they are different and separate. Good evening. Let me first say a word on koans, as I do periodically. Koans and their role, not just in our practice, but in our lives, really. And my teacher calls koans a unique spiritual tool. And I think that they are. I don't know if there's anything comparable in other religious traditions. I don't know of anything like a koan to just strip you of the notion that you know something about yourself, about your life, about other people, about the world. Because a koan takes away your conviction that you know something so simple as the nature of a table, like the altar table next to me, the nature of candlelight, the nature of these words I'm speaking, the nature of a thought. Sit for a little while with a koan and you realize that you don't actually have much of an idea of what these things truly are. That you don't know what they are from the inside. So maybe that could be a working definition of a koan. A view of life, of things, of the self, from the inside. And if you sit quietly with a koan, if you work diligently, if you look closely, eventually you realize not your idea of that table, but the tableness itself, the suchness of the table, which is no different than your heart. Isn't that amazing? A table is no different than your heart. A stick, the rain, this cushion that I'm sitting on, no different than my heart. No more distant to me than this blood pumping valve. How is that true? A koan wakes up the mind. It's a little bit like a slap to the intellect, or like cutting a hole in the ice in the winter and jumping in. You know, it wakes you up, it shakes you up. And that Oroshi used to say that koans short circuit the intellect. But I was thinking about this, and I think they actually jump-start it. You know, you've been coasting along, pushing the car down the road on neutral, right? You've been living your life, thinking about this and that, talking to yourself, putting things in mental boxes, sticking a label on them, marking the ones you like, the ones you don't like. When all of a sudden, the battery gets a jolt, and off you go. All pistons firing. And all of a sudden, you're in another realm. You realize you're the car, and there's no stopping you. And all that time that you were spending, I like this, I don't like this, I want this, I don't want that, is so much, you know, it's like sand dripping through your fingers. And it's not that there is anything wrong with categorizing, we know this. There's not that there's anything wrong with the intellect. There isn't. It's just that it's limited in its oomph, you know, in its horsepower. And so you don't actually have to have read the first thing about Zen or about Buddhism to work on a koan. By the time you get to work on a koan, usually you have read a bit, but you don't actually need that. You don't need to know the theory. If you strip down what working with a koan is to its bare bones, which is really a question. All you really need is the desire to ask, the desire to see, the desire to live, not just halfway, but all in. And I've said this before, but it doesn't hurt, I think, to repeat it. A koan is not a riddle. It's not even a problem to be solved. It's not a secret teaching. It's not a carrot to get you to sit zazen. A koan is really, it's both a mirror of your mind and a lens into reality. So a mirror is a piece of glass with silver, a silver coating. And if you think about it, it's amazing how a mirror works. But it's also problematic because what you can see mostly is yourself, right? So it's a limited view. But scrape off the coating, and what you have is clear glass. And on the other side of that glass, the whole world. The whole world with everyone in it, including this one. So a koan is like a mirror because it does show you the moment, almost immediately, the moment you start working on it, it will show you how you get caught in your opinions, in your own ideas, in your assumptions, your biases, in your desire, and your disappointment. And it will show me too. I've said this before. I can tell when somebody's sitting with the answer to a koan, not with a question. They've already decided that they know what the koan is, what the koan means. And we do this in our lives. We will often come to a problem knowing how we'll solve it, or thinking that we know how it needs to be addressed, because it's something perhaps that we have experienced before. And so what happens is one of two things. It works, our solution, or it doesn't. But when we come with a question, when we don't know, then every possibility is open. And the difference between knowing and not knowing is self. It's nothing but self that gets in the way of our seeing. That's it. Well, and time. And time, because it takes time. I said in my last talk, right over session, it takes time sometimes for the mind to settle. A koan is like a lens, because when you get quiet, when you get very still and very curious, what you see is that on the other side of that glass, there is, in fact, the whole world that you did not see before. It was there. It was there, but you couldn't see it. And it's a world where what you know and what you can name and therefore categorize and therefore bring close or push away does not operate. The world that the koan shows you is that there is a world where like and dislike, me and you, passing a koan, not passing a koan, doing the right thing, doing the wrong thing, all of it does not operate. As I was working on this, I thought of Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. And there's this scene where Alice meets a giant gnat. She says it's so huge, it's like a chicken. And the gnat asks her what kind of insects she rejoices in her world. And Alice says, well, I don't really rejoice in insects. She explains that she's afraid of them, especially the big ones. And then she says, but you know, I can tell you their names, some of them. And the gnat says, oh, of course, they answer to their names. And Alice says, well, no, I haven't known them to do that. I think that Ursula Le Guin story that I love and that I've told before, she unnames them, where Eve unnames all the animals. This is where this came from. And Alice says, no, I haven't known them to answer to their names. And the gnat says, well, what's their use of them having names if they won't answer to them? And Alice says, well, it's no use to them, but it's useful to the people who name them. If not, why do things have names at all? And then the gnat speaks of a piece of woods where nothing has a name. But if you think about it for just a moment. If things do not answer to their names, who are those names useful to? It is useful to me to call a mountain a mountain. But what is the mountain's name for itself? What is a tree's name for itself? What is light's name for itself? Who and what are names useful for and to? And how? How are they useful? How are they not? It is not a world, says a line from the Diamond Sutra, and therefore it is called the world. Because it is not a world, we call it the world. What is that saying? And when I ask, what is a mountain's name for itself? What is a bell's sound to the bell? I'm not asking a silly question or a rhetorical question. What I'm really asking is, when the bell rings, why do you put on your robe? Do you understand? I was saying to one of you the other day that in the transmission of the Dharma, nothing goes from teacher to student. And I didn't receive anything from my teacher. I sure hope you won't get anything from me. What happens when we meet face to face is that together we're verifying that you're seeing, that I'm seeing what all the many people before us have seen. My teacher did this for me. His teacher did it for him. And on going all the way back to the time of the Buddha. That is why it's called the rightly transmitted Dharma. B sees what A saw, what Z has seen, what Y has seen, and it actually couldn't be any other way. The answer to a koan is not multiple choice. Sometimes one of you will do this. You'll present, and I say no, and then you just try something else. It doesn't work that way. It's not like, shoot for the hip and see what I hit. If you see it, you see it. And if you don't, you don't, and you keep going. You keep working on it. You keep going deeper into what? Into your own being, the only place where the koan is. And it's not even an answer in the regular sense. It's the expression of you. It's a direct expression of you, of the world, of your heart. And now I'm using the word koan, but if you're working with the breath, same thing. What is breath? If your practice is shikantasa, same thing. What is awareness? Who is paying attention? Why? Because the problem of giving a talk like this is that afterward, everyone wants to do koans. It's not actually a problem, because I appreciate your enthusiasm. It's just a matter of readiness. Your mind has to be stable enough and focused enough and determined enough to not be discouraged by the inevitable confusion and disappointment and uncertainty and the feeling of that constant rejection, in quotes, that comes up. And everything that comes up about you. But that's actually the powerful thing about the koan. You think you're dealing with this one little thing, one little question, one little exchange, and all of a sudden you realize your whole life is right there before your eyes. And so you can't rush this process, and there's no reward at the end. Not in the usual sense. But you can be absolutely sure that if I see that the conditions are right and that your mind is ripe, I will absolutely bring it up and suggest that you do this as a practice. Sometimes I just kind of slide in through the back door, through a question that you didn't even realize was a koan. But the mind does need to just be stable enough and open enough and receptive. And so today I wanted to speak about this koan. It comes up periodically. It's a koan I really like. But I think it's a very powerful koan because it really addresses the why and the how of our practice. And really of anything that we take up, particularly over a period of time. Because as I have said many times before, anything that you do long enough, at some point you will not want to. Right? At some point it won't feel good or easy or like it's doing anything. At some point it won't feel as pressing as it might have at the beginning. It might just not feel like it's working. There are those periods where you kind of plateau and everything just feels dry. And so this koan, I feel, is the perfect balm for that. Or for self-doubt. Like, why am I doing this? The world is vast and wide, Yunmen says. Why do you put on your priest's robe at the sound of the bell? He's, of course, referring to that point, morning zazen, end of the period, the bell rings. We put in our case, our raksus on our head. We chant the verse of the Kesa, and then we put on our robes, the Buddha's robe. So, the koan, and I wanted to read it as it was written. It says priest's robe, but it can just be, the Buddha's robe. And if you do not have one, you can also ask at the sound of the bell, why do you, and let's say that this is the beginning bell, at the sound of the bell, why do you take your seat? Cross your legs, lower your eyes, and look inside. Why sit zazen? Why do the job that you do? Why eat a meal? This meal? Why have this partner? Why live in this house or this town? Really, the why of anything. But when it comes to our practice, among all the many things that we could do, that would be a lot easier. Why, when 7 o'clock came around, did you log into this Zendo, lower your eyes, and look inside? Why choose to look at our minds so closely? Why feel our bodies so intimately? Because it's uncomfortable sometimes, isn't it? It's boring. I don't really think it's boring, but some people might. It's hard. Not as hard as living in confusion, living in samsara, but hard. And this is something we should be aware of as a virtual sangha, because we can let out that pressure a little bit, and that has its advantages and disadvantages. Because each of us is sitting at home, we can ironically, paradoxically, make things a little harder for ourselves by making them easier. We can move whenever we want, turn off our camera, go have a snack if we want, go watch part of a movie, go shopping, come back. I mean, I'm kidding, but also not. Because I mean, I don't know what happens. And I want us to have that flexibility to come and go, to trust our own rhythm. Of course, I want that. And we should also remember that something happens when we don't move, when we don't jump up, turn away at the first sign of discomfort, of restlessness. If you've done sesshin in person, you know this. Sometimes the last thing you want to do is sit for another period, sit for another minute. And then you do, and something happens. I mean, sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes you're just uncomfortable and in pain. But sometimes something happens. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. That first time that you realize the nature of pain, which is the same as that moment in which pain stops being a problem. To me, that's the first time you get a taste of what the Buddha meant when he was speaking about freedom. This is my take on it. But the first time that you realize, oh, pain is not what I thought, and you're freed from it, even for an instant, in that moment, you're free. I mean, it's not Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, but in that moment, you're free. And so what happens when we stay in one place for a while? When we don't decide in advance how far we can go, how much we can do? What happens when we truly not know? After I sent my last newsletter, a couple of you pointed out that the title of that Ursula Le Guin story that I love, Vaster Than Empires and More Slow, is actually from a poem by Andrew Marvell to his coy mistress. And Kaito put it nicely. He said, it seems to be a poem about a guy trying to get a woman to sleep with him, but then it opens up into this magnificent study into mortality and something else, he said. And then I read the poem again and I thought it really is about a guy trying to get a woman to sleep with him, but it has this great couplet. My vegetable love should grow faster than empires and more slow. My vegetable love, my vegetable practice, natural, patient, growing in its own time. With my help, with my nurturing, not my willful anything. And I said in my writing that line, vaster than empires and more slow, to me, it's the perfect encapsulation of the practice of forbearance, the practice of bearing a little discomfort now so that we can be completely free, now and later. I mean, that's also the perfect description of Zazen, a moment of Zazen. To forbear is to patiently carry, to patiently bear or endure what is difficult to endure. So a mother has forbearance. A parent, a father, has forbearance in the face of their young adult's son, confusion, mood swings. A teacher has forbearance in the face of a student's struggles. We calmly and patiently endure a little discomfort now, and maybe not so calmly. I mean, maybe it's not always calm, but patiently. My aching legs, my restless mind, because I know it will set me free. In the doing, in the practicing of forbearance, I'm already experiencing that freedom. And it's vaster than empires because it is that large. It encompasses everything, 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 truly. When the bell rings, why do you put on your robe? That why encompasses everything. Yunmen says, if you understand it, all things are one. If you do not, they are different and separate. What's the it? And wasn't I just saying just before that understanding the intellect gets in the way? But he's saying, if you understand it, all things are one. No, sorry, this is in Yunmen. This is the capping verse. This is woman. But then he says, if you do not understand it, all things are one. If you do, they're different and separate. What's going on? Do I understand? Do I not understand? Are things different or are they one? Yes. It is vaster than empires. Is vaster than the entire universe. It reaches everywhere. It is no different than me or you. It is different since I'm me and you're you. But where is it? If it is that large, why can't I see it? If you listen with the ear, you cannot truly get it. The commentary says, when you hear with the eye, then you can really get it. But hearing with the eye is like hearing with the whole body. It's seeing with the whole body. It's seeing the sound of the bell, hearing the form of the robe. But remember, this is not a riddle. These teachers are undoing themselves, pointing to a way of being, a state of mind. What is this state of mind? To know what you cannot know, you have to see what you cannot see. This is a writer called Anna de Forest. You are in possession of a brain, a perceptual device, which works hard by design to make sure you stay the same person you were yesterday. She's a writer and a physician. Most of all, your brain will show you what you have already seen. This is so true. Most of all, your brain will show you what you have already seen and tell you things that you believe already. This is called confirmation bias. In the common language you feed to it, your dominant hemisphere chatters endlessly, barely listening to itself. So, to learn to see, you learn to see beyond what the mind tries to show you, and you learn to speak. And to learn to speak, you learn to listen below the common language to find instead the fresh particularity of difference. Also a nice definition of a koan. Do you see why we can't be moving fast? Do you see why it takes time and patience and silence and stillness? Like a boiling pot of water, If you keep turning off the flame every few minutes, it won't get hot. If you keep moving the pot from burner to burner, you have to be steady and patient. The heat has to build. And when it's ready, when it hits 212 degrees Fahrenheit, there's nothing else you need to do. There's nothing you needed to do to begin with, except turn on the flame. The water boils by itself. So, when the bell rings, why do you put on your robe? If you're struggling with your zazen, if you're not feeling it, this is the question to ask. It's like asking, why do you make art? Why do you make love? Why do you make a child? And is why even the right question? Is why what Yunmen is asking here? Why? Because no, that's not what he's saying. So then what? What do we know and how? What else might there be? How do we see what we cannot see?